Okay, I'm recording.
Okay, I can turn on my video too. Okay, so why do we use ESLOC and not some other form of measurement in the size of a software project? What do you guys think?
Sorry, I was yawning. ESLOC is just really amazing in the way that we're already measuring the fact that we have this much lines of code, and then we've actually decided that these are effective and these are going to be used. Whereas SLOC is just lines of code, and we haven't measured how well that code is being incorporated or done.
Yeah,
so I think we've already gone to a second level of this is good.
Mm-hmm. I think also really there's not a better way to measure a coding project, just because that's really the only way that we can measure the size of a project is just the number of effective lines of code that we have within the project, if that makes sense,
Yeah, I guess the only thing would be how much time does it take to do something, but then that would just be another different kind of waste of time, SLOC is also an effective use of our time because we know the size through the length, We know how many lines of code there are, and we know based on who we are and how good we are at coding, we know how much code we can understand and how quickly we can read it.
Yeah.
I also thought it was interesting that the SLOC was split up between new lines of code, modified, and reused. And there's a slight difference between those.
Yeah, definitely. Very cool. That's kind of all that I have to say about ESLOC. Is there anything else that you guys want to add to that?
No, that's fine. I know we had to talk about function points. Sorry.
So the second question that we need to talk about is, when is it best to use SLOC and when would it be best to use function points? So basically it's talking about the two different methods that we talked about in the reading, where the function points, as far as I understand it, the function points is something that you do kind of when you don't really understand the code as well. And it's just kind of a really quick overview, whereas SLOC is something that is a lot more detailed and goes into more of the code and what's happening. But I don't know.
In the book, the first time you come across function points, it says they are a measure of total software size, which ignores reuse, but is effective very clearly in the development process when SLOC is still difficult to predict. Yeah, like you're saying, it is more for an early development function for us to use.
Mm-hmm.
It's just interesting that it's still a way that we can measure how the size of the software.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't necessarily know how it does that.
Yeah.
It says that they are definitely different from each other in the book.
What did you think about the different function point components, like the D and ret or det and ret, and the transform? I kind of thought they were kind of confusing.
Oh, are you talking about the function, the equation with F?
Yeah. Which page are you on?
No, that's what I'm asking. Is that 6-3?
I'm talking about like the on page 84 of, if you're looking at it in the PDF.
84.
Yeah. 6.7.2.2.
Whoa. Okay.
And sorry, what I just pulled up the paper. What graph are we looking at?
It's not a graph. He's explaining the A det and ret.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I was just wondering if like I understood like det to be like a variable, maybe. I'm not sure if that's right. And maybe ret's a class or something.
So I think from the reading, I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to find it too. What page is it talking about det and rets again?
So page 66, or if you're looking at the PDF, it is page 84. Section 6.7.2.2. And then in the fourth paragraph, it says a det is unique user recognizable, non-recursive field. So I think it's just talking about lines of code. I don't think it's necessarily like, I think it is comparable to what you said. Sorry, my brain is dead right now. But
It's okay.
Oh, you're good. I think also, I don't know, I think in the quiz, it also gives us kind of a clue of what they are, where I think a det is like a single item, whereas a ret is a collection of debts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but so I guess like, is det like, is it more of a variable, like what Ethan was saying, or is it like, what is it?
Just going off the reading, I would assume that it is a
Variable, right?
somewhat of a variable. I mean, I think it just refers to a variable, just because it talks about how a det is information. So it's information that's dynamic and not static. So it's a dynamic variable, and it's read from a file, or created from a det contained in an FTR, which I believe an FTR is like a file transfer something. So I think like it is similar to a variable. I don't think it necessarily like it necessarily is exactly a variable, but I think it's very similar to a variable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because in the quiz, I think one of the debts was the identification of a single piece on the chessboard, where 0 is a space, 1 is a black king, -1 is a white king. So maybe that could be stored inside a variable or an array or something like that.
Yeah.
So it could be many things.
Yeah. Okay. What else did you guys like have questions on or anything like that?
It just seemed very long and dry, and
Yeah,
it's a little hard to follow sometimes.
Yeah,
it definitely.
even he was saying it's like this reading was kind of like weird.
Yeah.
I guess my question would be like, when would we want to use SLOC versus FP?
Okay, SLOC versus FP. So honestly, I think I'm a little biased. I think FP is the better method to use. And I think it even said it in the reading, where FP is something that's used a lot more in industry. just because I think FP is easier to understand. And I think SLOC is just very difficult to estimate, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I mean, it even says that in the reading where it says the SLOC definition frustration led to many researchers seek alternative methods of measuring the size of software development. And that's
Right.
where they came up with FPs. Just because, like, especially in the reuse case, just looking at the reading here, especially with the reuse case, like the reuse of code and stuff like that, it's really difficult to determine how long lines of code are going to take you, you know?
Hmm.
So I think in my personal opinion, I would prefer FP just because I think it's going to result in a easier to calculate and more accurate estimation.
So with FPs, we go by kind of like each function, and we say like this function will take about this much time, or like we basically break it up. Is that
Yeah.
kind of the idea of it?
Yeah, so instead of like doing the total source lines of code, you're just looking at kind of the functional points and kind of what functionality the program's going to have and break it up by functionality, I think. So
Yeah, that is nice. It's probably a better way of looking at it.
yeah, I mean, I definitely think that like SLOC can be beneficial. But just going off the reading and kind of my limited understanding, it seems like FPs is something that's going to be a little bit easier to understand and use. I don't know. What do you guys think?
No, I agree. I think it's just more of like it's a new concept. So I'm still struggling to understand it all the way, but I think you're right. Like if we just break it down, it does make things easier to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I would agree too.
all right. That's our discussion, I guess.
Yeah. Is there any other like questions or anything you guys had about the document? I mean, it's all kind of confusing, and it was extremely dry reading, but I mean, it's kind of making sense, which I mean, I think it's just something that comes with experience, you know?
Yeah, I think once we put it in practice, we'll be able to figure it out a little bit better.
Yeah, I hope so. I know last week with the project, he gave us like some very direct instructions with like, how do you do these like equations? But this week it's more of like, you got this, figure it out. And I'm just like,
Okay. Yeah, definitely.
All right,
Is
then.
that all the discussion?
I think so, yeah.
All right.
think everything we need to discuss. So if I understand the assignment correctly, we